What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? Shield Brothers 6 here with your weekly dose of history. Today we're going to be talking about, on this March 29th, the Constitution Act and what it meant for Canada and what it would become. So let's get started on this event that happened March 29th, 1867. So what is it, you may be asking? What's the big deal? What's the Constitution Act? Well, the Constitution Act of 1867, originally enacted as the British North American Act of 1867, and referred to as the BNA Act, is the major part of Canada's constitution that greatly formed what would be their confederation into what we know out today as Canada. The Act created a federal dominion and defines much of the operation of the Government of Canada, including its federal structure, the House of Commons, the Senate, the justice system, and the taxation system. So you can see how this act, this legislature, built so much of what Canada's infrastructure and system would be. So let's talk about the terminology used in this Constitution and Act. Well, Canada is a federation and not a confederate association of sovereign states, which confederation means in contemporary political theory. It is nevertheless often considered to be among the world's most decentralized federations. To use the term confederation arose in the province of Canada to prefer the proposals beginning in the 1850s, to federate all of the British North American colonies as opposed to only Canada West Ontario and Canada East Quebec. And to contemporaries of Confederation, the con prefix indicated a strengthening of the centrist principle compared to the American Federation system of statehoods. In this Canadian context, Confederation generally describes the political process that united the colonies in the 1860s, related events, and the subsequent incorporation of other colonies and territories as well. So that's what the terminology is for this, and let's continue from there. So, the Confederation. Confederation was accomplished when the Queen gave royal assent to the British North American Act on March 29, 1867, followed by a royal proclamation stating, "We do ordain, declare, and command that on and after the first day of July, 1867, the provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick shall form to be one Dominion, under the name of Canada." This act, which united the province of Canada with the colonies of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, came into effect on July 1st that year as stated. The act replaced the Act of Union in 1840, which had previously unified Upper Canada and Lower Canada into the United Province of Canada. Separate provinces were re-established under their current names of Ontario and Quebec. July 1st is now celebrated as public holiday Canada Day, this country's official national holiday. The effects. This is the basis of the Constitution Act of 1982, which is Canada's fundamental law. It determines the structure of government, the allocation of powers between federal and provincial authorities, and the interpretation of other statuses. Its operation derived from Canada's British legacy and legal decisions such as Parliament. And this would lead to the Canadian Confederation as the process by which the British colonies of the before stated provinces would unite into one Dominion. So, the immediate results of this proclamation. Dominion elections were held in August and September of that year to elect the first Parliament, and the four new provinces' governments recommended the 72 individuals would sit in the Senate. There was 24 for each of Quebec and Ontario, and 12 each for New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, depending on the size and status. The Anti-Confederation Party won 18 out of 19 federal Nova Scotia seats in September 1867. And in the Nova Scotia provincial election of 1868, 36 out of 38 seats of the legislature was won by the Anti-Confederation Party. For 7 years, William Annand and Joseph Howe led the ultimately unsuccessful fight to convince British imperial authorities to release Nova Scotia from the Confederation. The government was vocally against Confederation, contending that it was no more than the annexation of this province to the pre-existing province of Canada. They believed that they weren't actually confederating, but just being annexed by a higher power that they did not want to be a part of. But prior to the coming into effect of the Constitution Act 1867, there had been some concern regarding a potential legislative vacuum that would occur over the 15-month period between the prorogation of the Province of Canada's final Parliament in August 1866 and the opening of the new now Dominion of Canada's first Parliament in November 1867. To prevent this, the Constitution Act 1867 provided for continuance of existing laws from the three colonies of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, until new laws could be established in the Dominion. Thus, the Dominion's financial structures, systems, and actors were able to operate under the provisions of the old Province of Canada's Acts following Confederation, and many institutions and organizations were continued and assumed the same responsibilities for the new federal government that it had been held as the provincial organization beforehand. So those are the immediate results of the proclamation and their lasting effects. Here you can see the provinces of Canada, July 1st, 1867 to July 15, 1870. You can see the Northwestern Territory, the British Columbia, Rupert's Land, the Arctic Islands, Labrador, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick. This is what the map looked like at that time, but they would all eventually confederate into what is now known as Canada. So the earlier attempts, this wasn't the first time. March 29th, 1867, not the first time the Canadians had tried to confederate. The idea of unification was presented in 1839 by Lord Durham in the Report on the Affairs of British North America, which resulted in the union of Upper and Lower Canada, so some success there. Beginning in 1857, Joseph Charles Taché proposed a federation in a series of 33 articles published in the Courrier du Canada. In 1859, Alexander Teluk-Galt, sorry, I'm going to butcher these French names here, Georges Anchon Cartier, and John Ross traveled to Great Britain to present the British Parliament with a project for confederation of the British colonies. The proposal was received by the London authorities with polite indifference. By 1864, it was clear that the continued governance of the Province of Canada under the terms of the 1840 Act of Union had become impracticable. Therefore, a great coalition of parties formed in order to reform the political system and Canada itself. So, confederating. Here I built a nice little table showing the date, the name, and the province of the Confederation. July 1st, 1867 would be Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. July 15, 1870 would be Manitoba, Northwest Territories. And then July 20th, 1871 would be British Columbia joining the Confederation. July 1st, 1873 would be Prince Edward Island. June 13th, 1898 would be Yukon Territory. And then September 1st, 1905 would be Saskatchewan and Alberta. And then March 31st, 1949 would be Newfoundland. And then you can see the provinces there that made up those names and the Confederation. So all those would join by 1949, creating Canada. And then in 1999, Canada would also get a little more land, but I don't have that on here because I was just talking about the direct effects of the Dominion of Canada in the early times. So the legacy of this. The term Confederation has entered into Canadian parlance both as a metaphor for the country and for the historical events they created. It was therefore become one of the most common names for Canadian landmarks. Examples include Mount Confederation, Confederation Square, Confederation Building, Confederation Park, Confederation Station, Confederation Heights, Confederation Bridge, etc., etc., etc. This is very similar, however, to the American practices of naming things Union. You know, we have Union Tower, Union Road, Union Boulevard, etc. And likewise, the Australians have the same thing with Federation. So this is the legacy that the Confederation and the name Confederation had for the Canadian peoples, and from there on. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have learned something about Canadian history. I hope you enjoyed. As always, if you did, leave me a like. If you did not, go ahead and leave me a dislike. If you have a comment, a suggestion, a concern, you can leave that down below for me in the comment section. And as always, this has been Shield Brother 6, and I'll catch y'all next time.